My name is Claire Holt. I'm 33 and I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment just outside Minneapolis. It's quiet here most days, and that morning started like all the others. I was standing barefoot in my kitchen waiting for the kettle to boil, scrolling aimlessly through my phone. Light spilled in from the window over the sink, catching on the steam from the coffee grounds I'd just poured. It was routine, soft, forgettable. Then my phone buzzed again and everything changed. The message came from a number I didn't recognize. No greeting, just a line of text that didn't make sense. I'm so sorry about your passing. I can't believe what I saw today. For a second, I thought it was spam, maybe a mistake. But curiosity tugged, and I tapped the attached video without thinking. The clip opened on the interior of a church, stained glass pale candles and rows of people dressed in black. The camera shook slightly as if someone were trying not to be seen while recording. I recognized the place almost immediately. St. Mark's. The church my family used to attend for Christmas services. I hadn't stepped inside it in nearly 10 years. At the altar, two figures stood side by side. My father in a dark suit reading from a folded piece of paper. My mother in a lace dress clutching a handkerchief to her face. Behind them stood a casket, and beside that, resting on a small easel, was a framed photo of me. I blinked. I didn't move. My body forgot how. My father's voice filtered through the phone. He was saying things about me, about how I had always struggled but they had loved me, about how they had tried their best, about how I was gone. Gone, he said I was gone. I felt the phone slipping slightly in my grip, but I didn't let go. My knees bent without thinking, and I lowered myself to the kitchen floor. I watched as my mother dabbed her eyes, her lips quivering. The people in the pews, some familiar, some not, bowed their heads, mourning, praying. Not one of them looked confused. The video ended in a slow pan across the church, the sound of organ music filling the space. Then it cut to black. I sat in silence, heart hammering, breathing shallow. That was a funeral. My funeral. And no one had called. No one had checked. They had buried me without even asking if I was still here. And in that silence, with the taste of burnt coffee lingering in the air, a thought pressed itself into my chest like ice. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. Someone had declared me dead, and I needed to find out why. We were the kind of family people looked at and saw something solid. The Holts, Midwest, dependable. My parents owned a construction firm that had been in my dad's name since he was 24. They specialized in home renovations, basement remodels, garages. It wasn't flashy work, but it was steady. We had holiday cards, family dinners, matching shirts for company photos. My dad, Richard, was the kind of man who stood with his arms crossed at every PTA meeting. Not warm, but not cruel either, just practical. My mom, Teresa, had a way of speaking in careful tones, like everything she said had been rehearsed. Growing up, I always thought she loved us the same, but now I'm not so sure if she ever really looked at me. My younger brother, Jason, was the golden child, always had been. He was good at baseball, always brought home decent grades, even when I knew he barely studied. When he got in trouble for skipping class senior year, my dad called it a phase. When I got 1C on a calculus exam, I wasn't allowed to leave the house for 2 weekends. That was how it worked. Quiet favoritism, small consistent choices that made it clear who mattered more. After college, I came back to work for the family business. Not because I had to, but because it felt like the right thing to do. I managed the books, payroll, invoices, taxes, contracts. I was good at it. I kept things running. Jason, meanwhile, took over client relations, mostly riding around in his truck, shaking hands, smiling for photos. It wasn't until the spring after my 30th birthday that things changed. The numbers weren't adding up. Small discrepancies at first, a check that didn't clear, a vendor payment showing as processed twice. I flagged them, emailed my mom, asked Jason if he'd heard anything strange from our suppliers. Everyone shrugged it off. Then one morning, my dad called me into the office and shut the door. He was holding a printout, line after line of missing money. Over $120,000 gone. He didn't ask. He didn't wait. He just said the words like he had already decided they were true. You stole from us. I froze. I had never even taken a sick day without feeling guilty. I tried to explain, showed him my audit trails, the system logs. But his face didn't move. He just stood there, arms crossed like he had at every game, every meeting. Except this time, I wasn't his daughter. I was a liability. I turned to my mom. She was standing in the doorway. She didn't even blink. Her voice was steady, colder than I had ever heard it. Better one ruined daughter than two. I don't remember what I said. I don't even think I spoke. My ears rang, my hands were cold. Jason wasn't there. He didn't need to be. The decision had already been made. That night, I packed a bag. I didn't even get to say goodbye to the dog. The next morning, I tried to call. No answer. I texted my mom. The bubble turned green. I emailed. Nothing bounced back, but there was no reply. My bank login was locked for 3 days before access was quietly restored, minus my company card. My number was blocked. My email address was deactivated a week later. I tried reaching out to family friends. My Aunt Michelle, who used to take me for lunch on Sundays. She didn't respond. My godfather replied with a thumbs up emoji. Jason never responded at all. It was like I had never existed. I told myself at first that they just needed time, that if I waited long enough, the truth would come out. But months passed, then years. Birthdays came and went with no messages. Holidays passed in silence, and that silence did something to me. It's not that I stopped missing them. It's that I stopped expecting anything from them. Looking back, it wasn't just the betrayal that broke me, it was how easily they did it, how clinical it felt. Like erasing me was just another task on a list. File taxes, update QuickBooks, cut your daughter out of your life. People think betrayal feels like fire, but it's not. It's cold, numb, like standing outside in the snow without a coat, too stunned to move. I carried that numbness for years, until the funeral video arrived, and all that ice began to crack. Seattle was the kind of place where you could disappear without anyone noticing. It rained a lot and people kept to themselves. I liked that. I found a room in an old house near Green Lake and picked up a job at a coffee shop 2 blocks away. It wasn't much, but the shifts were steady and no one asked questions. I started over in small ways. New number, no social media. I stopped using my last name unless paperwork required it. Customers just called me Claire. I wore the same brown apron every day and got good at remembering orders. Skim latte, no foam, double shot extra hot, small details that kept me tethered. The days were slow and looked alike. Morning rush, midday, lull cleanup. I walked home in the evenings with my hood pulled up, earbuds, and trying not to think about Minneapolis, about what I had left behind, about who had left me. At first, I still checked my old email accounts just in case. I reread old messages from my mom, grocery lists, forwarded jokes, reminders about family dinners. They felt like fossils. After a few months, the accounts were deactivated. One of them said the owner was no longer living. I knew they had erased me, but some part of me still waited for a mistake. A crack in the silence. Maybe Jason would text, maybe Dad would call, even just a card at Christmas, something, anything. But nothing came. I got a second job doing basic data entry for a small legal office. Quiet work, spreadsheets, PDF, conversions file management. They didn't know my story. They didn't ask. I showed up, did the work, went home. That was the rhythm. Some nights I would sit by the window with a cup of tea and watch the street below. People going to dinner, kids on scooters, dogs chasing each other in the rain. Life moved on around me like I was watching from underwater. There were weeks when I didn't speak more than a dozen words out loud, just nods and half smiles. I learned to live inside my own head. I told myself I was fine, that I was lucky to be safe, that solitude was better than betrayal. Still, there were moments when the loneliness sat so heavy on my chest, I thought I might dissolve into it. It didn't happen all at once. It was slow, like the color draining from a photograph. Hope didn't vanish. It just dimmed. Even then, I never told anyone the truth, not fully. I let people think I was just a girl from out of town starting fresh. It was easier than explaining how your whole family could pretend you were dead and move on. By the time a year passed, I had learned how to vanish without dying, how to keep breathing in the absence of belonging. I built a life from scratch, simple and quiet. A life no one back home knew existed. A life they never thought to look for. It started with something small. I was trying to reset the password for an old email I hadn't used in years. I thought maybe there were photos in it, or an old letter I'd sent to myself back when I still believed time could fix things. I typed in the recovery form, answered the questions, hit submit, then the message blinked onto the screen. This account has been closed due to the reported death of the account owner. I read it twice, then again. The words didn't make sense. I thought maybe it was a glitch. Maybe someone had hacked the account. I copied the text and pasted it into a help form. A few hours later, I got a reply. We regret your loss. This account was reported closed following confirmation of death on file with state records. My hands went cold. I stared at the screen for a long time. The apartment around me felt too quiet. I clicked the link they had sent for verification and followed it to the public records page. I typed my full name, then hit search. And there it was. Claire Ann Holt. Date of death July 17th. Cause vehicular accident overseas. Status deceased. Certificate ID CA 91976 2031. I couldn't breathe. My body folded in on itself without warning. I slid down to the floor, back pressed against the kitchen cabinet, my legs bent awkward under me. I held the phone with both hands like it might slip away. The screen glowed in my lap. The words didn't change. They had filed paperwork, signed something, submitted it to the state. Someone had made my death official. The apartment was still. No sound but the buzz of the refrigerator and the low hum of traffic outside. I could feel the cold from the tile floor pressing into my skin. My breath caught somewhere between a sob and silence. I didn't cry, not yet. I clicked deeper into the site. There was a link to request a copy of the certificate. I didn't know why I pressed it, curiosity maybe, or proof that I hadn't lost my mind. I entered my email, then waited. The file came as a PDF. I opened it and scrolled down, reading my own obituary in government language. It said the remains were cremated, no autopsy, no family abroad to claim the body. It was signed and stamped, legal, final. There it was, a life erased by a few lines of ink. I sat there for what felt like hours. I didn't eat, I didn't move. Every so often I'd reread the lines as if something new would appear. But nothing changed. I had been declared dead, and no one had thought I needed to know. Somewhere in the middle of that night, I turned off the lights and lay on the floor. The apartment felt colder than usual, or maybe I was just finally feeling it. I pulled a blanket off the couch and covered myself, not because I was tired, but because it made the silence feel softer. That night, I learned something I had never imagined needing to understand. You don't need to stop breathing to be buried. Sometimes people bury you with paperwork, with signatures, with silence, and the worst part is it works. It started with a name I hadn't typed in years, Jason Holt, my brother. I opened a private browser window and searched his profile. He'd gone quiet for a while, but now his account was wide open. Public posts, wedding albums, hashtags, smiles. The first photo hit like a slap. He was standing under a string of light suit-pressed boutonniere sharp against his lapel. My parents were beside him, arms linked. My mom was laughing. My dad had that look, the one I used to think was pride. In the background, there were people clapping, tables filled with flowers and glasses. I clicked through more images. The bride in white, the cake with gold lettering, group photos on the steps of a country club, Aunt Michelle, cousins from both coasts, even Uncle Walter, who hadn't been to a family event in a decade. They had all come. They had gathered, toasted, cheered, and I wasn't in a single frame. There was no sign I had ever existed. Not a memory, not even a comment about missing me. The captions were full of light, to our only child, a blessing to raise, a joy to celebrate. The line stared back at me. Only child. I stared at it until the edges of the screen blurred. My thumb hovered over the image. I zoomed in on my dad's face, then my mom's, trying to find a crack, a shadow of guilt. Nothing, just smiles, confident, rested, whole. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat there holding the phone like it might fall if I loosened my grip. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. Every click into a new photo was another nail, another confirmation. They hadn't just cut me out, they had rewritten the story. I was gone, not lost, not mourned, just deleted. My brother, their pride and joy, was now their only child. My absence wasn't a wound, it was a revision, and that revision had made room for the life they actually wanted. My hands began to shake. I set the phone down, careful not to let it slip. The quiet in my apartment felt louder than ever. Outside, a car rolled past its headlights, flashing across the wall. But inside, everything stayed still. They didn't just bury me, they replaced me. They picked someone else to stand in the photo, someone easier to love, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions, someone who wouldn't remind them of what they'd done. That was the moment I stopped pretending this was about a misunderstanding. That maybe they thought I was dead, that maybe it was grief or confusion or guilt. It wasn't. It was choice. They chose to forget me, and they never looked back. After the wedding photos, I couldn't sleep. My body was still, but my mind wouldn't stop moving. Something didn't sit right. Not just the smiles or the caption. It was deeper than that. There was something missing that I hadn't realized I'd lost. The next morning, I opened my laptop and started looking. First the business records, then the estate listings. Then I searched my grandfather's trust, the one he set up for my college and future down payment. I remember the lawyer's office, the thick envelope, his quiet voice saying it would always be mine. But it wasn't. The name on the documents had changed. My name had been crossed out, reassigned. 6 months after my declared death, every asset I was promised had been transferred. My shares in the business, the education fund, the deed to the rental house in Bloomington, all now listed under Jason's name. No public announcement, no legal dispute, just quiet transactions and notarized forms. And just like that, everything I had worked for, everything I was supposed to inherit, had been folded neatly into my brother's life. I didn't breathe for a full minute. I scrolled back, checking dates, signatures, timestamps. It was all real, all filed properly, as if I had truly died and left everything to him by default. My parents hadn't just accepted my absence, they had built profit from it. I pushed back from the table and stared at the ceiling. The room was silent except for the soft whir of the fridge. The walls felt smaller than usual. The realization was too large to fit inside them. This wasn't grief. It wasn't even shame. It was planning. Precise, deliberate calculating. They hadn't mourned me. They had used me. I sat down again and pulled every piece of documentation I had into a single folder. Passport scans, work contracts, lease agreements, tax records, anything that proved I had been alive, present, working, and accounted for. My hands were steady now. The sadness that had once filled me began to harden into something else. Not rage, not revenge, just clarity, cold and exact. They didn't want me back. They didn't want to fix anything. They wanted me gone because it made everything easier. That was the moment I stopped grieving them. I closed the laptop and looked around my small apartment. I'd built a life here alone and invisible, but I wasn't invisible anymore. Not to myself, not to the law, not to the truth. If they wanted me dead, they should have made sure I stayed buried. Because now I had proof, I had time, and for the first time in years, I had purpose. The office was small, tucked into the third floor of a building that smelled like old paper and new carpet. I sat across from a young attorney whose nameplate read Marcus Delaney. He looked like he had just passed the bar, but carried himself like he had something to prove. That worked for me. I didn't need experience. I needed someone who would listen. I slid the folder across the desk. He opened it and flipped through the pages one after the other. Lease agreements, bank statements, tax filings, employment records going back 3 years. Every line was clean, every document legitimate. I had spent nights organizing it all, highlighting dates and matching addresses. He paused halfway through and looked up. His eyes were wide, but his voice was even. He asked if I was challenging a death certificate. I said no. I was correcting it. Because I wasn't dead. I was here, and I was ready to reclaim everything they tried to take. He went quiet again, turned another page, read slower now. I could see the shift in his posture. This wasn't just strange, it was real. Provable, legal. I watched his expression settle into something more careful. He started scribbling notes in the margin of a yellow legal pad. He said we'd begin with a fraud complaint, then file a motion to revoke the death declaration. He said it like a checklist, as if we were building a to-do list. I nodded but stopped him when he began outlining timelines. I told him there wasn't time. He looked confused. I pulled out my phone and handed it to him. A text from an unknown number received that morning. Just one line. They're holding a memorial for you next Sunday at St. Luke's. He sat back in his chair. His hand was still holding the phone, but his face had gone pale. I said I was going. He said it might not be safe. I looked at him steady and quiet. I wasn't going for closure. I was going to speak. He didn't say anything else, just nodded once slowly and set the phone down. The meeting ended like any other. He gave me a card and told me he'd be in touch, but when I stepped out into the hallway, I felt something shift. This wasn't just pain anymore. It was motion, a decision. They had written my ending, but they forgot to make sure I stayed gone. Now I had the documents, I had the proof, and soon I'd have a room full of witnesses. The message came late in the afternoon. No name, no greeting, just a line of text that sent a chill through my chest. They're holding a memorial for you this Sunday at St. Mark's. I stared at the screen, waiting for something else to follow. A clarification, a joke, anything. But nothing came. I read it again, then a third time. My hands were still, but my heartbeat wasn't. I hadn't stepped into that church since I was a teenager. My mom used to sing there on Easter mornings dressed in pearls like it was a stage. Now they were gathering again, dressed in black, pretending to grieve a daughter they never even tried to find. It wasn't a mistake. It was theater, a production for their friends, for the community, for their own conscience, a way to dress the lie up one more time and call it love. They needed an ending that made them look like victims, not thieves. I sat down on the edge of the bed and let the silence hang in the room. My phone rested in my lap, still unlocked, still glowing. I wasn't shocked, not anymore. What I felt was colder, deeper, a kind of clarity that doesn't waver. They wanted a funeral. Fine, let them have it, but this time I would be there. Not to make peace, not to forgive, but to speak. To tear down every word they rehearsed, to stand under my own photograph and say the one thing they never expected. I am not gone. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I packed a small bag with everything I would need, the documents, the records, the proof, and the certainty that this time they wouldn't be able to look away. Let them light the candles. Let them bow their heads. I would walk into that church not as the daughter they buried, but as the truth they tried to bury with me. And I would not leave until every lie cracked wide open. The church looked just as I remembered. Tall ceilings, soft candlelight flickering against stained glass. The organ played something slow and hollow. Outside, the sky had gone pale. Inside, the air was thick with silence. I stood across the street for a moment, watching figures in black file through the wooden doors. My hands were steady, my breath was calm, and then I crossed. The doors opened with a long creak, the sound stretching into the hush like a warning. Light poured in behind me, cold, sharp, and uninvited. For a moment, no one turned. Then one by one, they did. Heads twisted in slow confusion, whispers began to move across the pews like wind through dry leaves. Someone gasped. Another fumbled their phone but didn't lift it. The priest's hand froze in midair. A child near the aisle spoke first. "Mom, isn't that her?" The voice rang out too clearly. My mother turned, half rising, her eyes wide. Her lips moved but no sound came. She collapsed into the arms of the woman beside her, fainting in a neat, heavy fold. My father stood at the front. His expression didn't change. Not shock, not grief, just a blank gray stillness. His hands clutched the pulpit like it might hold him up. I kept walking. Each step echoed louder than the last. The marble beneath my shoes made a sound like slow thunder. The portrait of me stood beside the casket framed in gold, surrounded by lilies. I paused in front of it. My own face smiled back at me, frozen in time. That photo was taken before they turned on me, before they wrote the story without me. I turned toward the crowd. Gasps turned to silence. Some still stared. Others looked down. A few blinked hard like I might vanish. No one moved. I stood there alive in the center of a funeral made to erase me. And I let them look. Let them feel the weight of what they had built and the shape of what had come back to stand inside it. This wasn't shock. This wasn't grief. It was reckoning, slow and still and undeniable. I didn't rush. I let the silence settle, let the room hold its breath. When I finally spoke, my voice was even. Not loud, not soft, just steady enough to carry. I heard I died. No one moved. I said it again, slower this time, like I was reading a line from a script someone else had written for me. I looked around the room and saw the disbelief tightening in faces I used to know. Then I reached into my coat and pulled out the folder. These are my records, my lease agreements, my pay stubs, my tax returns, my flight logs, all of it. Proof I've been alive, living, working, paying taxes, existing. A few people in the back shifted. One of them raised a phone. The small red light blinked. I held the folder up higher. "You told the world I died. You filed fake documents. You gave the state a cause of death that never happened. I've read the certificate. It says I was cremated overseas. There was no accident. I never even owned a car." I turned to face my parents. "You made me legally disappear. You held a funeral without a body. You stood in this church and called it grief. But it wasn't. It was convenience." I looked at my father first. His eyes were fixed on the floor. Then I looked at my mother. Her face was blank, but her hands trembled. "You told people I lost my way, that I was troubled. But I wasn't lost. I was erased, and not for shame, for profit." I pulled out the copies of the trust documents, the transfer dates, the notary stamps. I turned toward Jason. You took everything, the trust, the house, the shares. You didn't mourn me. You replaced me. Another phone lifted, then another. Whispers moved like water between pews. I didn't come here to make a scene. I came to correct the story. You didn't lose a daughter, you sold her. I let the words hang in the air. You buried me to protect your story, but stories can be unburied, especially when they're true. More people were filming now. A few had their mouths open. One woman near the aisle was crying. My uncle sat frozen beside her. I looked down at the casket, then at the photo beside it. This isn't mine. This funeral doesn't belong to me. It belongs to your lie, and now that I've spoken, it's over. I placed the documents gently on the edge of the casket. Then I turned and faced the crowd once more. I didn't come back to be forgiven. I came back to be seen. And finally I was. The office was quiet when I came back. Marcus greeted me with a nod, but we didn't say much. He handed me a manila envelope. Inside was a single sheet confirming what I already knew. My legal status had been restored. I was no longer dead in the eyes of the state. Next to it were the first wave of filings: fraud, false reporting, identity theft, paperwork to begin the long process of holding them accountable. Not for revenge, for record, for truth. I sat down and pulled the forged death certificate from my folder. The paper felt thinner than I remembered, lighter, like something that had finally lost its power. I folded it once, then again, and then I tore it in half, clean and slow. Marcus didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The act wasn't loud, but it was final. I placed the torn pieces back into the envelope and sealed it shut. He told me the cases would take time. He said the courts would move carefully. I told him that was fine. I had waited 3 years. I could wait a little longer. As I stood to leave, he asked if I felt different. I said I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I just felt like myself again. He smiled a little, like he understood. Outside, the sky was gray. The street was quiet. But inside me, there was stillness, a calm I hadn't felt in years. I didn't walk away with rage or regret. I walked away with my name, and that was enough. The apartment is small but full of light. I wake to the sound of waves now, not sirens or silence. There's a path behind my building that leads to the water, and I walk it most mornings before the city stirs. I changed my name, not to disappear but to start clean. There's something powerful about deciding who you are after the world has tried to name you without asking. I don't go back to Minneapolis. I don't check their profiles. The part of me that used to wait for apology or explanation has gone quiet. It knows now that peace doesn't come from their words. It comes from not needing them. Some nights I still think about that church, not with anger, with distance. It feels like a play I once walked into mid-scene and rewrote with nothing but my voice. I didn't come back for revenge. I came back because I deserved to be seen, to be real, to exist fully and loudly in the face of those who tried to erase me. This new life is small and kind. I work at a local bookstore. I know my neighbors by name. I drink my coffee slow, and sometimes when the breeze shifts just right, I close my eyes and let the past keep walking. They told the world I was gone, that I had vanished, that I had failed. But I know the truth. I survived what was meant to undo me. They tried to bury me, but I wasn't soil, I was stone.